List expectations just really quick on what's going to happen. So this is about a 30 to 45 minute presentation. All right. So about the same if you were with us last week, about the same time as the armed security team's presentation. The purpose of this is to provide churches and volunteer security teams with a process for developing a use of force standard. So one thing that we run into when we go in to train a church security team or we talk to churches is a lot of you folks just don't know what a standard should look like. How do you write a policy? Why is it even important to have a policy for use of force? What does use of force mean to a volunteer? So we want to cover all that in the presentation today. Now, understand when we start talking about use of force, I'm not an attorney, but here's where this experience and best practices come from. So back in 2008, I left government work, managing government programs, physical protection programs, and started designing physical protection programs for commercial nuclear and chemical sites. And the folks that guard those sites are private security officers. And in most states, private security officers have the same authority to use force and make arrests as a private citizen. So it's exactly the same. So as I started going through that process, designing these programs, later in about 2013, I transitioned in designing programs for private Christian schools, then churches, and then other corporations. So this is a process. What I'm going to talk about today, I've learned through faith-based organizations and designing security programs very specifically on the use of force, having armed folks, having armed responders on protecting critical infrastructure and other types of facilities. So this is based on best practices and the things that I've learned. Now, take notes. So at the end of this presentation, there's going to be a Q&A. So if you have a question, you're on Facebook Live, type those questions into Facebook Live. Scott's going to see that. He's going to read that question out, and we're going to answer them. If you don't have any questions or you forget to take notes or you just don't want to ask while we're up here live, then you can email those questions to Scott, S-C-O-T-T-M, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. We'll get them later on tonight. We'll answer those as quick as we can. All right. When I finish the overall presentation, we're going to bring someone up that's going to talk about prepaid legal because that is part of this service and that is part of a use of force policy or guideline. And then after that, we're going to have an open Q&A. So again, if you want to ask questions, you can type those questions into Facebook Live. We'll see those questions, and Scott's going to ask, okay? Or he's going to ask me or read the questions to me. All right, so let's get started, all right? First of all, welcome. I hope that everybody's staying safe with all this mess that's going on throughout the country. If you're locked in your homes with your families, I'm sure that's a wonderful time, and we hope you're having a good time, and we're glad you're safe. But we hope you're safe, your family's safe, and you haven't any problems in this very exciting and very interesting time of our country. So let's talk about churches, and let's talk about the use of force, the process for that, and what that standard will look like. So I try to break this down as simple as possible. Take notes, do whatever you need to do so you can remember this, all right? So the first step that the church or the team needs to understand, and this is for even if you already have a security team and maybe you're trying to improve your process. So the first step that as a team or as a church should understand is, what is the legal definition of force? What does that mean? Like, why is this important? These are volunteers. They show up on Sunday. They've had a little bit of training. Why do we even need to know this? Well, here is, when we start to talk about legal definition, here's just a small part of that definition, and let me explain why this is important. Force is like constraining power. And when we talk about that, we talk about power that is normally concealed or that lies dormant. And so if you've had our other stuff, you've heard me say that if you have an armed team or even if they're carrying intermediate weapons, in the church environment, those should be hidden. They should not be seen. It's what we call that practicing conflict avoidance. So we don't want to conflict with the mission of the church. And so in this case, for us or for your church security teams, that power is going to be concealed. And when we talk about that, we're talking about intermediate weapons, we're talking about these firearms, and it could be like empty hand stuff, but people don't know that that's there. So this is constraining power, something that's going to constrain someone. It's an advantage that you have over someone else possibly, and that is something that's going to be laying dormant, like it's there for an immediate response or immediate purpose if need be. So, or capable of being called into activity. Now, legally, when we start talking about force, it doesn't matter if it's in a public setting like for a police officer or even a private citizen or like a volunteer like us. a lot of times we're talking about unlawful action. So when we talk about the use of force, especially from the legal definition or perspective, when we start to measure that, we're looking at, was something done correctly? Was something unlawful? Was something done that was something done incorrectly that could cause liability to us or the church? And so, again, we're going to get into liability and understand this. And write this down if you're listening right now. And if you're listening later on tonight on Facebook or 3 days from now, write this down and understand this. Being right or being lawful does not eliminate the risk of liability. Let me say that one more time. Being right or being lawful does not eliminate. So it doesn't take away the risk of liability to the church or to you. You can still be held to a certain standard of liability if you're lawful and if you're right. And we're going to talk about that. Okay? This is just talking about liability, and even if you do everything right. This is a robbery of a subway that occurred in California, I think about a year and a half ago. So what you're going to see on the video in just a second is you're going to see this guy that's in the screen right now. He comes in and he goes to rob. I said Subway. Sorry, it's a Starbucks. Comes in to rob the Starbucks, and so it's an armed robbery in progress. And there is a citizen that's in. He's in the Starbucks enjoying his coffee, reading his paper. He sees this armed robbery. Now, under the law, he has the right, because he's seen a crime in progress, he has the right to do what he does. And what he does is, you're going to see, he stops this. Okay? So he goes up, he gets behind the guy, and you're going to see the video in a second, and he grabs him. There's a confrontation. He eventually does take this person into custody, gets control of him. They call the police. The police come and they arrest this guy, and he's charged with committing an armed robbery. So let me let you watch the video. You're going to see it, you're going to hear it, and then we're going to talk about what happens at the end. Okay? They can hear it, correct? That's fine. Here we have, and you heard the police, you heard a legal analyst at the end of the video talk about this. So here you have an armed robbery in progress. You see a citizen seeing this crime in progress. He sees this happen. He now has the ability legally to go stop this because he's seeing a felony take place in front of him. And so he does it. He stops it. He's able to take the person in custody. The police come and arrest this guy. They charge him. And then after the fact, the mother of the armed robber says, look, my son broke the law, but at some point this guy went from being a good citizen to a vigilante, her opinion, okay? And so she starts talking about bringing legal action against the citizen for stopping this crime in progress, okay? So he did everything right. He did, from what we can see, he did everything lawful. You heard the police officer, the police chief, and then you also heard the legal analyst. But that doesn't mean, again, just because we're right and we're lawful, we can't be held liable. Okay? So what that means is, if your church security team or volunteers take action, and it doesn't mean it can be with a knife, a chair, it could be, and we're going to talk about this, it can be detaining someone, because in most states in this country, a private citizen can't even detain someone unless a crime has been committed or they see that crime in their presence. And so you can be held liable even if your actions are lawful and they are completely 100% right. So understand that. All right. So number one, understand what the use of force, what that definition is, and what that means. And again, understand, just because you're right, just because you follow lawful steps, does not mean that you or your church are not going to be held liable for what has occurred or what's happened. Number two, the volunteer is acting on behalf of the church. So just like the children's ministry, just like a greeter, if you've got a volunteer security team and they're standing out front or they're inside the building, they're in the worship center, wherever they're at, they're acting, what they do, they're acting on behalf of the church. Now, there's not an employer-employee relationship there with a volunteer, but whatever actions they take, those actions are based off what is perceived to be what the church expects, because they're acting on behalf of the church. So understand that the volunteer is a private citizen. Whatever they do is based on, or their ability is going to be based on, to peacefully and successfully resolve some sort of an incident, is going to be based on their level of training, so the training they receive, and the experience that they have in doing this. So when we talk about they're acting on behalf of the church, remember, whatever situation that you expect that security team or that security ministry to be involved with, if they haven't been trained, if you haven't figured out kind of what that could mean, and they haven't been trained to resolve those incidents, then obviously whatever bad comes out of that can fall on the church, because they're acting on behalf of the church. Remember, you're increasing your risk when we start to talk about training and having your volunteers understand exactly what they're supposed to do. And so if you don't do that and your risk increases, then of course there's going to be potential for liability. All right. So again, remember that volunteer, based on whatever amount of training they've had, is acting on behalf of the church. So if you tuned in last week, you saw this video, but I want to show this again. This is a shooting. I believe it was a negligent shooting that occurred at a Jewish school out in Los Angeles, California. And so what happened, there is a guard. Now, this guard is being paid by this institution. But again, because this is a private security guard, the same rules apply to a private citizen, except here there is an employer-employer relationship. But when we start to talk about liability and allowing people to do this type of work for you, this is a really good case. So this is a case where a YouTuber, for whatever reason, kind of drives up on the edge of the property and starts to video operations that are occurring at this Jewish school. There's an armed security guard in a uniform. He sees this action. And when we start to talk about the training and the ability of your security team and what that means, here we've got an armed guard that sees this action. He goes to do something. Now, what you're going to hear in just a second is you're going to hear a shot. Now, I do not believe that the guard meant to actually shoot at this person. I believed what happened was that he, just based on what I've seen, he had his finger on the trigger and there was a negligent discharge. Now, no matter what, it doesn't matter. The situation did not call for the use of deadly force. So if a firearm's discharged and a projectile hits somebody, that's deadly force, and we're going to get into what that means. So number one, deadly force was unauthorized. Okay. So when we look at that, the liability falls back on this organization that he is representing. He's being paid by the school. I don't know if he's a contractor or if he actually works directly for the church. So deadly force in this case was not authorized. And even though this was probably negligent, that does not matter. There's still liability. So let me let you watch the video here, and then we're going to talk about it.
Shot me!
This was the startling moment a YouTuber whose channel name is Furry Potato was shot in the leg.
Shot me!
The whole thing was streamed live on the account. Police say the content curator, who goes by Zoe Perez, was outside a Los Angeles synagogue standing on a public sidewalk when she was shot by a security guard.
During the incident, we did try to keep the girls calm, and the building was placed on lockdown.
The school's principal says there was concern over what Zoe was filming.
An individual was filming our girls at the school and the building, the perimeter of the building extensively, including all the windows and the exits. And this caused a great deal of anxiety to both our staff and our students.
You know, I'm just taking shots of the thing. You know, he comes up super aggressive. I'm not looking to talk to that guy at that point.
Some say the school's response was uncalled for.
Listen, nobody should freak out when someone's recording from a public sidewalk. And that's all she was doing.
Perez is a First Amendment auditor, according to the YouTube channel description. The account, with more than 17,000 subscribers, shows video of Perez going to public places and testing First Amendment rights.
Again, I don't understand how I could interfere with business when I was in the lobby for 25 seconds, but you know, it is what it is.
Perez, who here is commenting on previous unrelated charges, isn't facing charges in this case. The security guard was charged with assault using a deadly weapon. This is InsideEdition.com.
So again, I think the case, from what I remember following back up on this case, the charges were dismissed against the security officer, but they were still liability, and we don't know if that's because don't know if the Jewish school, if the school itself, if there was a settlement. I don't know that background, but I know the charges were dismissed. But understand, he's acting on behalf, or he was acting on behalf of that school, and so there was liability that fell on him. Obviously, there was criminal liability, and of course, civil liability also exists. So remember, they're acting on the behalf of the church. Liability does exist. So let's talk about the difference here. So let's talk about arrest and restraint, the difference between a private citizen and a peace officer. So this is something we get questions about quite often when we talk about use of force and armed security teams and intermediate weapons. And I also see a lot of questions about carrying handcuffs and restraints, what that means. So understand, as a private citizen, a volunteer, even me, I'm not volunteering, I'm walking around the street, I see something. We have a very limited authority, number one, and we talk about use of force. And two, we start to talk about the restraint or detaining someone. So when we talk about using force or detaining someone, as a private citizen, we need to either see the crime, so a crime has to have been committed, right? And we need to see that, or we need to have reasonable cause to believe that it has been committed. So we have to explain that, number one, before we can use force to detain somebody. If we don't see that, then again, we go back to this liability issue, and that falls on the church because you are acting on behalf of your volunteers, acting on behalf of the church. The training standard and knowledge. And so I'll get questions about, hey, this is who's doing our training, or this is what kind of training we're going through. This is what someone said, the police department's going to come in and do this training. So understand that there is a difference, again, between our ability to use force and detain someone and then a public official like a police officer. So for police officers, they have privileges and immunities when we talk about detainment and arrests and the use of force that we don't have. And part of that's based on because of, number one, what they do and what they're being involved with and what they get thrown into every day. And so there's some things they can do that we cannot, based on something called reasonable suspicion, because they might have believed something happened. They have the ability to detain someone. We can't do that. And understand that if they get into a situation that the government, that public entity that they work for, a lot of times will cover that liability based on policies and procedures. And so for us, we start talking about arrest and constraint as a volunteer, as a citizen. I can't even physically stop someone. We have a class that we teach called the Israeli Security Concept, or Field Threat Assessments, and that's a class that teaches security volunteers how to see a violent event 2 weeks before it happens. So all violent actors, prior to conducting the event or the attack, have to go through a planning and preparation process, and we teach that, how to look for that 2 weeks, 2 months before it occurs. And in that process, we talk about a field interview or a security interview. And that security interview means when there's certain behavioral and contextual indicators present, the security team member goes up and they conduct the interview or just have a conversation with someone. And in that training, the volunteers are taught two requirements necessary for a security interview. Number one, you got to be able to identify those behavioral and contextual indicators, so which is what the class teaches. But number two, you have to have cooperation from the person that you're going up to talk to. Because just because I see potential suspicious activity, or just because I believe they're a behavioral or contextual indicator, does not mean when I go up to talk, that person has to stay there and answer any question as a citizen that I'm going to ask them. So there's even liability when we start to talk about stopping someone and holding them. And so very different from a police officer, We cannot do that unless we see a crime or unless we believe a crime has been committed. And again, those laws vary based on the state. Here in the state of Tennessee, we're in beautiful Brentwood, Tennessee now, just outside of Nashville. A private citizen and a security guard cannot detain someone unless a crime's been committed, okay, or unless they have reasonable cause to believe that a crime has been committed. So there is a difference between arrest and restraint, me stopping someone, making an arrest, and using force, as opposed to a police officer. Immunities and privileges we do not have. The next thing that the church needs to understand or look at is, in your state, where does the authority for the use of force come from? So what that means is you guys need to dig into your state laws. Here in Tennessee, it's Tennessee Code Annotated, TCA, and the code here in Tennessee for a private citizen or a security guard, licensed security officer, because the laws are the same, 3911-621, and it's very small, and it's not put up there for you to read it. Basically, and most laws in the states are the same for private citizens and guards. There's a couple of states that are different. South Carolina's a little bit different with security officers, but the majority of states where I've designed security programs, about 6 or 7, it's the same. And what that means is, before I can use force as a citizen or as a volunteer serving on a church security team, again, I've got to see a crime committed. Now, what that means is a misdemeanor, a lesser offense. I would have to see that, like a theft or trespassing or some sort of a simple assault. And then if it's a felony, so something more serious like aggravated assault or armed robbery, then what that means is I have to have a really good reason to stop that person. I've got to have reasonable cause to believe that something's happened. So I've got to get other information, okay? In all of this, whatever force we use, when we see that incident occur, the force must be reasonable. And reasonable means, so reasonable force, write this down, especially if you're a church leader and you're looking at security teams and you're trying to figure out what a policy would look like. Reasonable force is the minimal amount of force necessary to overcome an opposing force. The minimal amount of force necessary to overcome that opposing force. And so understand, look, taking a volunteer, putting a pistol on them, sticking them out there to act as a security team, if that's all you're doing, you're going to put your volunteers and the church at risk. Because that's not all there is to this thing about use of force. In fact, the majority of situations that your church security team is going to fall into are not going to require the use of deadly force, a firearm. It's probably just going to require them going up and talking to someone, and that's a whole different level of training. That's something different that they need to cover. And so they need to understand what reasonable force is. And again, write this down. Reasonable force, because that must be reasonable based on the law, whatever force we use, is that minimal amount of force that's necessary to overcome that opposing force. All right, so understand where the authority for your volunteers to use force, where does it come from? Okay? The next thing that the church should understand is, what are the categories of force? And there are 2 categories of force throughout the country in most states, and that is deadly force and non-deadly force. Deadly force is the firearm. Listen, before I give you the definition of deadly force, if you're allowing your security team and their volunteers and they are carrying firearms, you need to look at allowing them to carry intermediate weapons, which is additional training. It may mean that they have to have additional certifications. Here in the state of Tennessee, it does. And they probably need to have some other skills, because if all they have is a weapon, like a firearm, and that's the only element that they have to respond with, then you put yourself at a higher risk. So if they're carrying firearms, you should look at the possibility of intermediate weapons and some other training. So deadly force is any force likely to or intended to cause death or serious bodily injury. Death means heart stops beating, blood stops pumping, person stops breathing. Serious bodily injury is big long definition, but understand it could mean, in the state of Tennessee, it means like protracted unconsciousness, so like long-term unconsciousness. It could mean extreme physical pain. It could mean the loss of a function of internal organ. It could be permanent scarring. So there's a wide variety of things that serious bodily injury could be defined as. So deadly force, any force likely to or intended to cause death or serious bodily injury. And of course, non-deadly force is force that's not intended to cause that. And so very important to understand those 2 categories of force. And if you're going to have your security team deal with this, they need to have training for both. And remember, under both categories, different than from a police officer, what we talked about earlier, okay? So church leaders or folks that are going to be managing the security team. So as you start to look at this as the security ministry, so what is my risk or my exposure to a hazard, the church, and what does that mean? So the next question I would ask if I were a church is, what level of risk am I or is the church willing to accept? So let me kind of talk about that just a second. There's a couple ways in physical protection that we actually address risk. Now there's 5 ways, but one of the ways here does not, or one of the 5 that we're talking about doesn't really doesn't work at the church. So I've added the 4 here. So number 1 is acceptance, and what that means is risk acceptance means that the church agrees to absorb that impact. And what I see in the church a lot, especially with smaller churches, because they don't understand, when we talk about accepting the risk, an example of that might be, look, I've, state of Tennessee, if I've got an armed security volunteer, it says, the law says, or an opinion from the Attorney General or one of the Attorney Generals says that all they have to have is a carry permit, okay? So I'll stick that person out there with a carry permit. They don't have any other training. There's no intermediate weapons. I don't have a policy or procedure. So they've had this minimal amount of training and certification, and that's all I'm doing. So really, that's an example of where you're probably the church is going to accept, or they're going to be willing to absorb what risk is there. What obviously what exposure to that hazard. So a lot of churches, without even knowing it, accept a whole lot of risk. Okay. The next thing I would do is I would avoid it, okay? So the next option to address it is the church avoids the risk altogether, and what that means is we remove the opportunity for that hazard to be present. Now, in the church environment, what that's going to probably mean is you don't have a security team. You don't have a safety ministry. Nobody's standing out there, or you've got someone out there watching, they're observing, and they're just there to report. They're not going to have contact with anybody, and you're going to do everything you can to make sure as a church that they do not get into some sort of an incident that's going to involve the use of force or detainment. Most of the time, this means you just don't do it. And I've seen churches do this. They're worried about the liability piece, so they avoid it, so they remove that risk altogether, and they don't do anything. Risk transfer. This is what a lot of churches do. This is what I would suggest if you have a team. This is what you need to do, or a ministry, or this is what I would do. Risk transfer means we're gonna give that risk to someone else. That means we have to pay someone to do that, and that's insurance. Okay, so when we transfer risk, that means the church goes to their insurance company. They tell their insurance company exactly what these volunteers are going to be doing, and then in turn, that insurance company is going to come back and ask a list of questions. Now, last week we told you this. If you didn't tune in last week for the armed security team presentation, we have, based on me doing this for a number of churches and private businesses and other locations or other facilities, we have a list of questions that they're probably going to ask. If you want those list of questions that your insurance provider is going to ask if you haven't done this, email us at SCOTTM, SCOTTM, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com, and we will send you that list of questions so you can be prepared before you make that phone call. So, so insurance for the church, pick up the phone, tell them what you're going to do. They're going to ask a list of questions because they're going to try to figure out a way to mitigate that risk. And the more that they mitigate that risk, understand there may be an increased cost for that. Now, for the individual, very quickly when we start talking about transferring risk, this is prepaid legal. Security team members in churches, please write this down. And someone's going to come up and talk about this in a minute. If you have a carry permit, if you're acting as an armed guard, if you're acting as a volunteer in your church security ministry, or you're walking around the public with your carry permit armed, you must have prepaid legal. Prepaid legal, it's not carry insurance. It's something that's there that when you get into an incident, a use of force incident, that's as the police show up, that's somebody you can pick up the phone, you can call an attorney that's going to show up, and this prepaid legal service is going to cover those charges. And so this is a necessity if you're armed, whether you have a carry permit or you're just a volunteer standing post with a gun or even with an intermediate weapon, or even if you just have unarmed combative skills, you need to have prepaid legal, okay? And we're going to bring somebody up to talk about that in just a second. So risk transfer for the church, pick up the phone. We've got these folks. This is what they're doing. They're going to ask some questions. For you individually, your team members, look into prepaid legal, and we're going to provide that here in just a minute. And then we have risk reduction. What that means is the church decreases the exposure, and that's by having policies and procedures, proper training, like having security SMEs come in to be able to provide that training, people that understand the difference between a private citizen and then what a law enforcement officer would go through and what they need for training. So these are the ways to address that risk acceptance, risk avoidance, risk transfer, and of course, risk reduction. Okay? This is, again, we showed this last week. If you have not seen this, this is a church up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. This just happened several weeks ago, I think less than a month ago. Church security team goes inside, I think it's after the church service. They have a dedicated space where I guess they have roll call, and they, I don't know if they unload weapons in this space, but whatever happens, for whatever reason, and we don't know the reason, a firearm, a volunteer takes out a handgun out of a holster. There is a negligent discharge. That projectile from that weapon hits another volunteer. Actually, I believe it hits him in the head. Luckily, it's a minor injury. It doesn't kill him. The police are called. There's an investigation. And before you see this video, I'll let you know as we watch this, just so you can see it if you haven't, that church security team member was criminally charged, and I believe it was with negligence. And so understand, when we start to talk about risk reduction, risk transfer, policies and procedures, and making sure that your volunteers have had the proper amount of training is very, very important for the church.
A large church like this has dozens of ministries, including a security team that has dozens of members. One man on that team was injured when another security guard's gun accidentally went off during services Sunday morning.
There was no need to evacuate the building because it was contained to a specific room within the church building itself.
Police say 5 members of the security team were in the office when the handgun discharged.
The fired round ricocheted off the ground.
Either bullet fragments or pieces of the floor wounded the other security guard.
It is unfortunate that this type of incident occurred, and again, it was unintentional.
Police say the church and security team members are cooperating in the ongoing investigation, but police are not yet releasing the names of those team members and will not say if charges could be pending in this case. In Lancaster County, I'm Meredith Jorgensen, WGAL News 8.
Police say security guards comparing their guns' trigger pulls led to a shot being fired in a church, and now charges have just been filed against one of them. The shot was fired last month at the Worship Center on New Holland Pike in Lancaster County. Security guard William Mays is charged with simple assault and reckless endangerment. Police say Mays unintentionally fired a bullet from his gun while exchanging guns with another guard in a church office. 2 of the 5 security guards in the office were hit by bullet fragments.
All right, folks, so understand that there's no such thing when we start talking about liability as unintentional. If you have firearms, you have intermediate weapons, someone is injured, that is negligence. And again, when we start to go back to the church and we start to talk about that risk transfer, this is why it's very important for the church to have a conversation with the insurance company after someone's talked to them about this program, to let the insurance company know exactly what the scope of duties for that team is going to be, or that ministry, and the individual volunteers also need to have some sort of prepaid legal service. All right, so to get into that, so those are the steps. I'm going to bring up a very nice young lady. She's going to talk about prepaid legal services and what that means. This is who we use. We suggest to team members all over the country, and there's other teams that use this same organization. She's going to spend about 10 minutes talking about that and how you can get signed up with that today. And then when she's done, we're going to do a quick Q&A. Okay?
So my name is Maria Juliana, and I'm the outside sales manager for the United States Concealed Carry Association. So I want to talk to you about what the USCCA does for you in the event that you are in some sort of an incident. So there's 3 things that the USCCA does for all of its members. Number 1 is education. Number 2 is training. And number 3 is that legal protection that you're going to need following an incident. So with our education and training, our members have a wide variety of training resources that they can utilize right from their member portal. There's scenario-based training There's different reciprocity maps, gun laws, things to keep you updated as a responsibly armed American. Even if you don't currently carry, someone in your house may have a weapon, whether it's a gun, a bat, a knife, any type of thing that you could use to defend yourself, including your fists. So we want to make sure that you have those tools and resources to be able to survive or get out of an attack. We know if we don't, that nothing else is going to matter. Our training follows in with that. We have a wide variety of instructors across the nation that we can connect you with when you're ready to do the physical training. You can also contact Scott and Michael, as they have a wide variety of training resources available to you as well. Now, the most important part is, as Michael's mentioned, the legal protection that follows after your incident. There are two sides to the legal system. One is criminal and one is civil. So under the criminal side, we look at different charges like aggravated assault. A brandishing charge, for instance, is an aggravated assault charge. So if we do pull our weapon and we don't fire it as a threat is approaching us, once the officer responds, they're not doing an active investigation. They're responding based on the phone call they've received. With your USCCA membership, you have us to follow you after that incident from the very start of needing an attorney, needing bail, possibly expert witnesses for your trial, all the way through to the civil side, which we'll talk about in a moment. So once you are involved in your incident, be it a brandishing charge, a shots fired charge, or anything else that's self-defense related, you're going to have a USCCA card that you carry with you at all times. So post-incident, you'll call our critical response team, and the number is right here for you on the back of your card, easily accessible. The critical response team is going to immediately dispatch an attorney to you in your area. Now, I say in your area because I'm sure a lot of you have traveled or are going to travel in the future. With your membership, we're going to cover you wherever you go, all 50 states, with any legal weapon of opportunity. Firearm, knife, fist, car if you need it. Once we've got your attorney assigned to you, the next thing you may need is bail. And with your membership, we're going to cover your bail as well. We want to get you back home with your loved ones. You've got an attorney, bail, the expert witnesses, all charges dropped and dismissed is our ultimate goal because you acted in self-defense. The second side to that legal system, of course, is that civil side. The civil side is where we're fighting for our money. We fought for our freedom, and now we're fighting for our money that people are suing us for. This could include excessive force. This could include pain and suffering. This could include damages from being in a fist fight while we were protecting ourselves or someone else. With your membership, you have options. The typical civil case lasts 3 to 5 years. You're missing work, you're wondering what damages are going to be awarded, but with your membership, we have the ability to pay those damages for you and settle a case up front within a matter of weeks instead of years. That's the confidence of having a USCCA membership, knowing you're protected anywhere that you go at all times. Now, the best part about our membership is we have what we call a 365-day guarantee. Once you start your membership, you have immediate access to your member portal where you can dive right in, look at the scenario-based training. You'll get the subscription to the Concealed Carry magazine, which is full of gear reviews, industry updates, things to keep you well-rounded in the firearms industry. With a 365-day guarantee, you get into your portal, check out all the things available, and if you decide that it's not right for you, you can call us and cancel at any time through the first year for a full refund. We're confident that you are not going to find another legal protection as all-inclusive as the USCCA that gives you the ultimate confidence as a protector in your area. Now, we're talking a lot about church security teams as well. You're protected as a volunteer on your church security team as well as in your daily life wherever you go. So the USCCA follows you with those acts of self-defense, whether it's in your house of worship or it's in your home or even out on the street in public. Another great benefit of the membership is your spouse and your children are covered in your home and on your property as well under your primary membership. Should you decide to cover your spouse, we offer a tremendous discount for your spouse as well. So I'm going to show you the breakdown of the 3 memberships here in just a moment. Am I going backwards? There we are. The 3 different breakdowns, the reason we have these is we want to make sure that every person can have some sort of membership with us. So we've got a gold, platinum, and elite. What we find is that that middle membership, the platinum, is the most popular because no one's ever exceeded these limits before. With your platinum membership, your card is worth $1,150,000. And each membership covers the exact same things from the bail, the expert witnesses, and through those civil damages. If you want the most protection available to you, the elite membership is the way to go. This offers $2,250,000 in protection, and it's the highest level you can get for the ultimate peace of mind as a protector of yourself and of your loved ones. Everyone gets education and training. You get a little bit more of the education and training material as you move up in membership. However, you're never locked in, and you can move up or down at any time. We want you to have some sort of protection, to have that peace of mind. So I want you to go ahead and text MANN to 87222. This is going to allow you to have a link sent to you where you can sign up immediately. There will also be a link below for you to click on and sign up as well. Go ahead and click on that link, start exploring the 3 different memberships, and I want you to go ahead and sign up today as you're protected immediately. Get in there and look at the things available to you from the gun laws, the reciprocity maps. When you travel state to state with our app, it'll actually notify you of the new laws in the state that you're in so you can continue to be that responsibly armed person. If you have any questions or you want to sign up with a certain person, you can contact me or you can contact Scott. My number is 480-9957, and you've got Scott's information to contact as well. We're available to you anytime you need us. And once you become a member, our critical response team and member services team is available 24/7 for you to ask questions or just see what all's available to you from the USCCA. I hope to have you all join our family today. And again, the platinum membership you saw, go ahead and start with it and move up later on if you decide to. If you guys have questions, I'm available as well as Scott 24/7 to answer anything that you need.
Folks, we're going to go to a Q&A real quick. We got a couple questions. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Again, if you've got them, you can email those questions to Scott at ScottM, SCOTTM at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Or if you want to know the answer now, you can just send those through Facebook, and he's monitoring. If you happen to be online with us, you've got a question. He's got an armed guard card, which exceeds that requirement in the state of Tennessee to volunteer. Does that increase the risk? Actually, what that does for you and for your church is it can decrease that risk, and here's why. State of Tennessee, the requirement for an armed volunteer is only a carry permit. So if you want to be a volunteer in the state of Tennessee at your church, the only thing that the state's going to require is you to have your carry permit. So the armed guard license far exceeds that requirement. So in the state of Tennessee, that's an additional 16 hours of training. It covers a little bit more on use of force, and it goes through more shooting and through more manipulation of the weapon, and then some procedural issues or procedural stuff also. So what an armed guard card can do is 2 things. Number one, it can create your standard for your church, especially in the state of Tennessee. So you're going above and beyond what is required. And number 2, what that's also going to do is that will, or it can lower your risk, because now you're putting another barrier of policies and procedures ahead of you or in between you and that possible hazard of that risk of liability. Good question.
Next question, Michael, from Emily is, should we arm our church? Should we arm the volunteers?
Good question. So Emily wants to know, should they arm their church or should they arm their volunteers? Look, we teach firearms. I've been a student of Colonel Cooper's modern technique for 32 years. That's what I teach. I am a gun person. I'm an armed person. I design armed security programs and physical protection programs for big corporations and for a big church. But I would say, as a person that designs these programs, your main objective for the church should be, that strategy should be prevention. And understand that guns do not prevent shootings. Your observation and actually information that you gather 2 weeks, 2 months before those violent events occur or what prevents shooting. So do you have to have a gun to prevent it? No. Do you have to have a gun to respond to something? Absolutely. So if something does happen, it's great to have that armed response capability there, but understand a couple things at a church. It does increase your risk. You need to have a conversation with your insurance company. You should have a standard, and we can help you with that standard. All you have to do is email us, and then your volunteers should look into, and they should get some sort of prepaid legal service. So it's not a requirement, but before you go down that road, follow the guidelines we just talked about.
Next question is from Bernard. Bernard is asking, he's basically saying he's never been taught use of force before. So is there a class? Is there something besides, the firearms training where he can learn about the use of force and maybe even specifically in his state?
Yep. So, if you're in the state of Tennessee or you're close, email us. We'll send you a schedule. All of our firearms classes or anything, whether it's a carry permit class, armed guard class, or just an advanced defensive handgun class, with citizens, we cover everything when we start to talk about the use of deadly force or the use of force in general. Now, for your state, so if you're not in Tennessee, you don't come to us. What you can do is you can Google, you can get online, and you can look at the use of force rules or laws in your state. And if you've got a specific question, if you cannot find that, email Scott at ScottM, SCOTTM, at MichaelMannSecurityServices.com. Tell us what it is you're looking for. We'll find those laws for you, and we will send you that information for free. Okay?
Michael, one of the questions was more specific towards that prepaid legal services, and maybe you could answer this one. If not, we'll bring Maria back on. Do you have to have your carry permit in order to use that prepaid legal service?
Yep. So question came up about do you have to have a carry permit to have prepaid legal or use it? Absolutely not, and Maria can talk to you about that, especially who we're using USCCA. That covers a chair. If you saw the video of Starbucks, the guy used a chair. Well, USCCA would have covered him using that chair, okay? If it's a knife, if it's your bare hands, if it's your car, then your prepaid legal service, I know USCCA does, will cover whatever you use for force. So it can be open hand, it can be a knife, it can be a chair, it can be a baton. So you don't have to have a handgun or you don't have to have a carry permit to actually be able to use that prepaid legal service. Okay, folks, that's all the questions. Again, if you're going to be joining us later, watching us at a later time, please email us at ScottM, SCOTTM, at MichaelMannSecurityServices.com. You can call Scott anytime, well, within reason, 615-606-1006. Hey, visit us at MichaelMannSecurityServices.com. We're still training. We're practicing the social guidelines. We're keeping classes small. We're practicing distancing in the classes when we're inside. So we still have a training schedule that's up and running, and we're about to update that because we have other classes coming up very specifically for smaller churches. So check our website, or you can always get us on Facebook and Instagram at Safe with Mann. Folks, thank you for tuning in today. If you're going to be joining us later on, you're going to be watching us later on. We really appreciate that. Again, if you've got questions, please shoot us an email. And above all, especially churches and those private citizens watching, physical protection is about prevention. It's not about response.